have access to the recorded lecture. If you remember that link that I shared uh, with you on WhatsApp, that has the list of the lectures that we have so far recorded. In that list, we have some of the systems in human anatomy and physiology being covered or already covered. So there are those that are not really covered. So my interest is to cover those that have not been covered yet, and we are starting with the lymphatic system, and then we look at the immune system in this presentation. So what are our objectives? Of course, one, we need to understand the components of the lymphatic system. We also need to know the nature of the fluid that flows within the lymphatic vessels or the capillaries. So what are its properties, how is it formed, and how does it flow? And then we'll look at the relationship between the blood capillaries, the lymphatic capillaries, the interstitial fluid, the lymph, and then how exchange of nutrients actually happens in this fluid. And then we'll look at the role of the lymph nodes in filtering the lymph, and then also how they initiate or activate immune responses. So those are our objectives for this session. So the lymphatic system basically contains the fluid which we are calling the lymph. This fluid contains the nutrients just like what is contained in blood. So it contains nutrients and other chemicals just like what blood contains, apart from the fact that lymph does not contain blood cells such as the erythrocytes and the platelets. Okay, there is also it also contains proteins, but of course the amount of protein is less in lymph. Okay, and lymph basically, or the lymphatic system. If we basically look at it, we talk about the lymph, which is the fluid. We talk about the lymphatic organs, and then we talk about the vessels, that is the lymphatic vessels, and then also the lymphatic capillaries. So those are the channels through or the tubes through which this lymph flows. Okay, so basically when you talk about the lymphatic system, that's what we are referring to. So the functions of the lymphatic system: one, it plays an important role in absorption of fats from the small intestines into the bloodstream, and also the lymphatic system is very important in producing lymphocytes, which are very important cells in immunity. I also don't forget about the fluid that flows within the lymphatic vessels. Okay, that is the lymphatic vessels and the lymphatic capillaries. That fluid is very important in many ways, including one, which is that the fluid allows the equalization or the balance of fluids between interstitial fluid and then also the bloodstream. Okay, and then we have the lymphatic system playing an important role in defending the body against microorganisms that invade the body. Okay, so basically, if you're going to talk about the functions of the lymphatic system, you just need to know what the lymphatic system consists of. We said one, it consists of course of the fluid which we call lymph, and then we said it consists of vessels, and then capillaries, and then the lymphatic organs. Okay, so here you can see that we have a network of lymphatic vessels spread around the body, on the arms, and then we have a dense network around the breast and the shoulder and around the neck. Okay, and then we have lymphatic vessels around the intestines, and then you have also a dense network around the groin. Okay, here around the groin. So the areas where we have a dense network of lymphatic vessels and lymph nodes are the groin, okay, the armpit, and then the neck, the cervical lymph nodes. So these can be palpable if someone has an infection. Okay, so this is basically the lymphatic system. It consists of blood and lymphatic vessels, and then the lymph nodes, which are these swellings, the round swellings, and then we have what we call the thymus. This one also contains lymphoid tissue, and then the spleen is also a lymphoid organ, therefore it has lymphoid tissue, and then we also have other organs that also contain lymphoid tissues, such as the pairs, patches on the intestines, and then also the bone marrow, and then also the appendix. These are some of the organs that actually have lymphoid tissue. Okay, so we have seen that the lymphatic system consists of a network of lymphatic vessels that carry the fluid lymph. So this fluid moves in one direction. Okay, moves in one direction, and then it moves through these vessels and finally gets into what we call the lymphatic trunk, and then the lymphatic trunk now leads into the vein, okay, or into the venous circulation. So at this point here, this is where the lymph is formed, an area where there is a dense network of capillaries, and then the capillaries now merge to form the lymphatic vessels, as you can see. And then when the major lymphatic vessels merge, then we have the lymphatic trunk, and then the lymphatic trunk is the one which now connects to the major veins that we shall look at later on. So we'll look at also how this fluid is formed. So we are saying that the lymphatic system has a fluid that flows in it, and we have described the characteristics of this fluid. We say that this fluid has all the components of blood, but does not have two types of cells, that is the platelets and then the red blood cells. Okay. So how is this fluid produced? This fluid is produced from what we call interstitial fluid. This fluid can also be called tissue fluid. It surrounds the cells in tissues. Okay. Now the excess fluid, the excess interstitial fluid, gets absorbed into the lymphatic capillaries. So when it enters the lymphatic capillaries, it actually becomes the lymph. Okay, and then as it flows to what we call the lymphatic vessels, and then through the lymphatic vessels, it will end up in the lymphatic trunk, and then the lymphatic trunks converge and form two main channels called the the thoracic duct, and then the right lymphatic duct, which we shall look at and see where they actually drain the, which areas of the body do they drain the lymph from. Okay, basically these ducts empty the lymph into the subclavian veins. Okay, returning it to the bloodstream. Okay, so this you can see at this point. This is the subclavian, this blue one, the subclavian veins. Okay, so that is where the lymphatic trunk empties the lymph into the blood stream. Okay, so we have talked about the capillaries, which are basically the small, permeable, thin-walled tubes. Okay, they are very permeable. They lack the basement membrane. Okay, some of these lymphatic capillaries have valves. The presence of valves ensures that lymphatic flow is in one direction, or what we earlier on called as one-way flow of lymph. Okay, the lymphatic capillaries can be grouped into two. The deep ones, that means these are the ones that are in the muscles or in the viscera or in deep structures, and then those that are close to the surface, and we call them superficial. Okay, and they drain the skin, the lamins of the skin, which is one of the layers of the skin. So we say that the capillaries merge to form what we call lymphatic vessels. Okay, they also have one-way valves. Okay, and these vessels can contract with the aid of contractions of the skeletal and smooth muscles, and also changes in the pressure in the thorax. Okay, like we earlier on said, we said that the ducts are the ones that lead into the vein. Okay, so we have the right subclavian vein and then the left subclavian vein. So you see that the right lymphatic duct is the one that empties its lymph into the right subclavian vein, and you will see that the right lymphatic duct drains the lymph from half of the head, the right half of the head, the right half of the neck, and then the right half of the chest, and then the right upper limb. Okay, and then the rest of the body, the rest of the lymph from other parts of the body actually drains into the subclavian vein, the left subclavian vein. So the thoracic duct is the one that empties into the left subclavian vein, and that lymph actually comes from the rest of the body, apart from what I've just described earlier on, the right half of the head, the neck, chest, and then the upper limb. So this part here, if you can see my cursor, is where the lymph drains into the right subclavian vein. So that means that the left subclavian vein is the one that drains much of the lymph. So we earlier on said that we have lymphatic organs, and we listed most of them. All these organs are characterized by having the lymphoid tissue. And when we talk about lymphoid tissue or lymphatic tissue, we are basically referring to the tisular fiber, we are referring to the macrophages, and then we are also referring to the lymphocytes. So if you talk about lymphatic tissue, just know we are referring to tissue that contains lymphocytes, reticular fiber, and then microphages. The lymphocytes are basically blood cells that are made in the red bone marrow. Okay, and then they migrate to the lymphatic organs for maturation and waiting for activation to respond to any pathogens. So the lymphocytes are key in responding to pathogens that invade the body. And then we have the reticular fiber. These ones are basically intercalated network that hold the cells called lymphocytes together and in place. Okay, so when lymph or even blood flows through these reticular fibers, they are filtered. Okay, and then dead tissues and microorganisms are actually trapped and destroyed by the lymphocytes. And then, of course, macrophages are also important immune cells that are formed in the lymphatic tissue. They play an important role because of phagocytizing or phagocytosis, which is basically the process of engulfing and digesting pathogens. That is what we call phagocytosis. I don't know who has joined us. You have not muted. When you let your mic open, you get echo and noise, and our recording won't be good. Okay, so that is about macrophages. We said that these are important cells that play a role in immunity. They destroy pathogens by the process of phagocytosis. And we said phagocytosis is the process of engulfing and digesting pathogens. Okay, so they are very, very key in defending the body against infections. Okay, so if we have an infection in our body, or if we have antigens in our body, the macrophages actually respond. They are present in lymph nodes, and they play an important role in capturing the microorganisms and also dead cells that need to actually be destroyed after filtering the lymphatic fluid. So we already know what lymphatic organs are. We say these are organs that contain lymphatic tissue, and we say that lymphatic tissue basically contains or consists of the reticular fiber, the lymphocytes, and also the macrophages. So all these organs that we have listed here contain those elements. So we start with the tonsils, which are basically a ring of lymphatic tissue around the nasal, oral, and pharyngeal regions. Okay, so on the upper part of your mouth, we have that the tonsils. Okay, sometimes they can be infected, and then we have what we call tonsillitis. Okay, so but basically these tonsils provide protection against any microbes that can invade the nose or even the mouth. And then the second lymphatic organ is the lymph nodes. Okay, the lymph nodes are basically round in nature. They can vary in size. They are beans shaped, okay? Or basically they are rounding. They are actually rounding structure. And they are found distributed along the lymphatic vessels, as we have seen, and we have also noted that there are specific areas where they are concentrated, where they are more. Okay, we talked about the groin, we talked about the neck, and then under the axilla. Okay, they are very, very important in responding to any infections. So they play an important role in removing bacteria and also what we call tumor cells, cells that are not dividing normally. The covering of the lymph nodes is what we call the capsule, and then inside the capsule you will see that their spaces are called the trabeculae. Okay, these spaces are divided. Okay, or the trabeculae is an extension of the capsule that divides the lymph nodes into smaller compartments, and these compartments are the ones that contain the lymphatic tissue, which we basically now know the role. And then we also have spaces within the trabeculae, which we call the lymphatic sinuses, which are spaces between the lymphatic tissue that contain the cells called macrophages. So the lymph flows through the lymph nodes, and is where this you have this filtration happening, and then the macrophages responding if there is need. So the lymph enters into the lymph node through vessels that we call the afferent vessels, and then the lymph leaves the lymph node through lymphatic vessels that we call efferent vessels. So inside the lymph node, the following take place. It's that filtration that happens. That filtration allows the capturing of debris, foreign material, dead cells or damaged cells, and also pathogens. And then we have the lymphocytes monitoring for any sign of infections, and then responding or activating the immune response appropriately. And then we also have the lymph nodes as sites for where cells such as the B cells and the B cells and the T cells mature. Maturation of those lymphocytes take place within the lymph nodes. So therefore, there is a lot of immune responses. We have immune responses happening within the lymph nodes. Okay, so that means that the lymph nodes play a big function in containing infections and defending the body against any type of infection. And then the lymph nodes play an important role in regulating the circulation of the lymphatic fluid and ensuring that there is fluid balance in the body. So we have another lymphatic organ called the spleen. The spleen is located on the superior corner of the abdomen, or the abdominal cavity. Okay, it's also covered by a capsule that also extends inwards to form the trabeculae. Like the other lymphatic organs, it also filters blood and acts as a very good reservoir for blood. Okay, so it stores blood, and it can be, if the blood that is stored in the spleen can act as a compensation reserve during hemorrhage. Also plays an important role in activating an immune response. Another organ is the thymus, which is a triangular gland located in the superior mediastinum. It has two lobes, so we say it is bilobed. Still, like the other lymphatic organs, it is covered by the capsule, which also extends inwards to form the trabeculæ, and therefore there are small compartments inside the, the thymus. It's a site for maturation of T cells, okay, and it is present from as early as pregnancy. So that means that it is present by the 8th month of pregnancy in the unborn child, but it starts to decrease at the age of 40 and then completely disappearing at around the age of 60. The other lymphatic organs are the Peyer's patches that are found in the walls of the small intestines. Okay, they can be referred to as the tonsils of the small intestines. They also still play an important role in protecting the intestinal bacterial population by preventing the growth of bad bacteria, what we call a pathogenic bacteria. The other organ which is not commonly added to lymphatic organs are the appendix, which also is a site for maturation of B cells, and then the bone marrow is also a site for generation of blood cells, including the white blood cell platelets and then the red blood cells. Okay, so it contains the site, basically the bone marrow or the red bone marrow, and is a site for the stem cells. The stem cells are very important in generating the other types of cells. So the hematopoietic stem cells are responsible for production of the cells, the blood cells, the red blood cells, white blood cells, and then the platelets. We also have the mucosa-associated lymphoid tissue. Okay, these are basically, it includes the different lymphoid tissues formed in the mucosal surfaces of the body. So you can have mucosal surfaces of the respiratory tract, the intestinal tract, and the genitourinary tract. So that is that with the lymphatic system. So we can now move to immunity. Immunity. So immunity is the ability of the body to resist damage from pathogens. And we have two broad types of immunity: innate immunity and adaptive immunity. So the innate immunity is the one that is actually non-specific and includes elements like physical barriers to prevent the entry of pathogens into our body, either through the skin or through the mucous membranes, and also the chemical mediators. These are molecules that produce or that protect us from being infected by pathogens. So we have chemical mediators such as the lysozymes in tears and saliva. These are very important in killing the bacteria. And then we have important chemical mediators that play various roles in immunity. So we have histamine, prostaglandins, leukotrienes. These play an important role in increasing vasodilation and permeability. Okay, and when this happens, of course, it allows the lymphocytes to be to enter damaged tissues and then be able to destroy pathogens and also some infected cells. And then the third element of the innate immunity, the inflammatory response. We also have other components of the innate immunity, and one of those is what you call the complement system. The complement system basically is about proteins that are found within the plasma and are usually inactive. But when a pathogen invades the body, then these complement proteins are actually activated. So the activation of these complement proteins results into a cascade of reactions that will lead to a series of other reactions that will result into processes such as inflammation, phagocytosis, and lysis. Okay, so the complement proteins basically promote immune responses. For example, promoting inflammation, promoting phagocytosis, and also lysis of the bacterial cells. Okay, so that is the complement system, which is basically a group of proteins that are found in the plasma and play an important role in an immune response. They promote concepts like, or they promote the occurrence of inflammation, phagocytosis, and lysis of bacterial cells. And then other molecules called the interferons. Okay, the interferons are also proteins that defend against viral infections. So when a cell is actually infected by a virus, the virus takes over the DNA machinery of the cell, and then therefore it controls the production of nucleic acids and proteins, and this will be the basis for formation of other viruses. Now what happens is that the infected cells produce interferons, which we said are protein signature. What these interferons do is that they stimulate the neighboring cells to produce antiviral proteins that inhibit viral replication. Okay, and therefore you will not have more new viral nucleic acids being produced, because the interferons have activated the neighboring cells to produce antiviral proteins that will not allow further production of viral nucleic acids in them. And then we have the white blood cells, which are basically one of the major cellular components of immunity. Like we saw earlier on, we see that white blood cells are formed from the red bone marrow together with the red blood cells together with the platelets. Okay, so the red bone marrow is the one that produces the white blood cells, and the white blood cells are very important in responding to infections of foreign bodies, or if they are dead tissues or things like that, they respond. So they can move to one area where there is danger or where there is a pathogen by the process called chemotaxis. Okay, chemotaxis is the process through which white blood cells move towards an area where that has chemicals that are pathogenic in nature. So we have white blood cells such as the neutrophils, basophils, and eosinophils being phagocytic in nature. That means that they can carry out what we call phagocytosis. So we can refer to neutrophils, basophils, and eosinophils as phagocytes. So the white blood cells can be divided into granulocytes, those that have granules in them, and then the agranulocytes that do not, those are white blood cells that do not have granules in them. Okay, now the granules are these small dots that you see in the cells. Okay, so the granulocytes include the neutrophils, the eosinophils, and the basophils. Okay, and then those that do not have the granules include the lymphocytes and then the monocytes. Okay, the lymphocytes are further subdivided into three: the B lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, and then the natural killer cells. The monocytes are the ones that, when they migrate into tissues, they become macrophages. They become what we call macrophages. So let's look at the phagocytic cells. We say that the basophils, neutrophils, and macrophages are phagocytic. And we say that the process of phagocytosis is when the phagocytic cell engulfs and destroys the particles or the pathogen. Okay. So these particles that can be destroyed by phagocytic cells can be microorganisms, can be dead cells, or can be damaged cells, or can be foreign substances. And mainly the cells that have strong phagocytic properties are the neutrophils and the macrophages. Okay, but of course, other cells, other white blood cells such as the basophils can still have some limited ability to do phagocytosis. Okay, so the neutrophils are small phagocytic cells that are the first to respond. So if there is a pathogen, the neutrophils respond first. Of course, they also release chemical signals that enhance or that allow for further mobilization of other types of white blood cells to respond. And then the macrophages come later, or they enter last. Okay, so they come from monocytes. Like I said earlier on, monocytes become macrophages in tissues. Okay, so they leave the blood and then they enter the tissue, become macrophage, and they form a system that we call the mononuclear phagocytic system. They are larger than the neutrophils, and they do protection within the blood and also the lymph, the lymphatic fluid. So we can find macrophages in different organs. Their names can change in accordance to where they are found. If you find macrophages in the lungs, then they are called the dust cells. If you find them in the liver, they are called the Kupffer cells. And if they are found in the central nervous system, they are the microglia. The immune response, this happens after an invasion by a foreign body or material or a pathogen or microorganism per se. So if there is any damage that happens because of an irritant, because of a microorganism, you will have inflammation happen. So inflammation is basically a complex biological response to a danger or a defect that has happened, and that defect can come from any cause. The aim or the primary purpose of inflammation is to protect the body. Okay, but if inflammation is not controlled, it can result into negative outcomes. Okay, so that is also an element that you need to note. So the cells that are involved in inflammation are the basophils, eosinophils, and then the mast cells. The basophils, like we said, are examples of granulocytes. Okay, so they are also produced from the red blood matter. All white blood cells are produced from the red blood matter. Okay, so they are mobile. That means they can move from where they are, or they can be mobilized and then go to an area where there is need. For example, in infected tissues. Okay, So they can also be activated by the complement system. If you remember the complement system, where we have more than about 20 proteins that are inactive in blood, but if there is danger, these proteins can activate the immune system by promoting inflammation, lysis, and phagocytosis. Okay, so the basophils can also be activated by the complement system, okay, and the adaptive immunity. So when they are being activated, the basophils release chemicals, the histamine leukotrienes, which are very important in triggering an inflammatory response. Okay, and then we have the mast cells. These are also formed from the red bone marrow. They are non-mobile. That means they cannot be mobilized to move to other places. They are found in the connective tissues, okay, particularly near capillaries. So therefore, they because they are not mobile, they should be strategically placed in areas of potential pathogen entry, such as the skin, the lungs, the gastrointestinal tract, and the urogenital system or tract. And then we have the eosinophils. These ones usually respond to allergic reactions that happen. So they are activated, or they are involved in inflammation that is related to allergic reactions and also asthma. And then the last cells of inflammation are the natural killer cells, which are basically a subset of lymphocytes. Remember, we said that we have 3 types of lymphocytes: the B lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, and then the natural killer cells. So just like other types of lymphocytes, they are produced in the red bone marrow, and they make up to 15% of all the lymphocytes. Okay, so they are very, very, very important in responding to infections, especially in destroying virus-infected cells. So they are very specific in responding to that. Okay, but if someone has been exposed to an infection and the natural killer cells have been mobilized, when the person again is exposed to the same exposure, the natural killer cells are not readily activated. This is the point of saying that the natural killer cells do not have what we call a memory response, and therefore we classify them as innate immunity. Okay, we shall look at what we call a memory response later on. Okay, so the process of an inflammatory response is basically when you have a foreign organ or pathogen and then causing tissue damage. The damage of the tissue sets into motion a series, the release and activation of a number of chemicals, chemical mediators such as histamine, prostaglandins, leukotrienes, complement, and the kinases. Okay, so these chemicals will have a number of effects, but most importantly, they will result into vasodilatation, the vasodilation, and then we'll also have increased the vascular permeability. These 2 effects are very, very, very key. Okay, one, when we have vasodilatation, but when we have vasodilation, we have an increased blood flow to to the area that is affected. So when you have this increased blood flow, it means more phagocytic cells will actually enter the affected part or the affected tissue. And then when we have increased vascular permeability, it means that larger molecules such as fibrinogen and the complement proteins can enter the affected place or the affected area. Okay, and then the fibrinogen can be able to be converted into fibrin, and this plays an important role in isolating the infection and enhancing the inflammatory response. Okay, and then of course the increased permeability allows more phagocytes to arrive at the damaged area, such that the bacteria can actually be destroyed. Okay, so inflammation can be categorized as local or systemic inflammation. When we talk about local inflammation, is when we are talking about inflammation that happens to a specific area of the body. That means that it's not generalized. It's just a given part of the body that is having inflammation. So the signs of local inflammation include redness, heat, swelling, and pain. These things happen because one, increase the blood flow. It causes the redness, increase the vascular permeability and chemical mediators. All these cause the effects that all the symptoms that we have just talked about. Okay, depending on the part that has been inflamed, there can be loss of function. That means you may not be able to use that part. And then systemic inflammation is when we have inflammation occurring throughout the body. Okay, so this is when you will have issues to do with more increased neutrophil production and also more phagocytosis taking place. And then we'll have the feeling of fever. That means pyrogens will be produced, and this will stimulate the production of fever. Okay, and this eventually enhances immune activities and contributing to the inhibition of microbial growth. So all along we have been looking at innate immunity, which we said includes physical barriers, includes chemical mediators, and then includes the inflammatory response. So we are going to look at the second type of immunity, which is called adaptive immunity. And this is characterized by its ability to recognize and distinguish specific antigens. And then the second property is that it has the ability to remember previous encounters with antigens and be able to respond more fast. Okay, so we are going to look at that. So let us look at the antigens. What are antigens? These are basically substances that can stimulate an adaptive immune response. Okay, they can be foreign antigens. That means that they come outside the body. Okay, and that they could be allergic reactions. They could be transplanted organs or parts of the body. And then you can have, of course, infections or antigens produced by bacteria and other microorganisms. And then we have what we call self-antigen. These are produced basically by the body. Okay, and they will increase immune response. They can be beneficial or harmful. They can have harmful effect if they start to destroy cells that are actually wanted by the body, or they start to destroy normal cells. In this case, you have what we call an autoimmune disease. So an autoimmune disease is when and what could be normal cells are being destroyed because of self-antigens. So adaptive immunity can be divided into antibody-mediated immunity and cell-mediated immunity. When we talk about antibody-mediated immunity, we are basically referring to the antibody playing a very important role in responding to the pathogen. So these antibodies are produced by the B cells. Okay, they are produced by the B cells. So antibody-mediated immunity involves the B cells and the antibodies formed in the plasma. So this type of immunity is very effective against extracellular antigens. That means these are antigens that have not entered the cells. Okay, and it is associated with allergic reactions. Okay, the B cells are the ones that actually produce the antibodies. Okay, so they differentiate into plasma cells and then produce the antibodies. And then the cell-mediated immunity involves the T cells. Remember, we said that white blood cells are divided into three. Then the B cells, the T cells, and then the natural killer cells. So we are saying that the B cells are involved in antibody-mediated immunity. The T cells are involved in cell-mediated immunity. Okay, so that is very important distinction that we have to make. The T cells can be subdivided into the cytotoxic T cells and then the helper T cells. Okay, so the cytotoxic T cells produce the effects of cell-mediated immunity, and then the helper T cells promote or inhibit the activities of both the antibody-mediated immunity and the cell-mediated immunity. All right, so here we are. We said that the B cells differentiate into plasma cells and then produce the antibodies. So how do these antibodies look like? The antibodies are basically proteins. Yeah, proteins, and they are Y-shaped. They have 4 polypeptide chains, the 2 identical heavy chains, and then the 2 light chains. They are also classified as gamma globulins. So when we talk about immunoglobulins, immunoglobulin G, immunoglobulin M, they're basically referring to antibodies. Okay, so the antibodies basically have 2 parts: the variable region, which are the 2 arms, as you can see, the Y part, and then the constant region, which is basically like the tail, okay, onto which the 2 arms rest on. So the antibodies are very, very important in binding to the antigen and then initiating a chemical response that will result into mobilizing or attraction of white blood cells in order to come and destroy the pathogen or the antigen. Okay, so the antibodies allow, or when they bind to the antigen, they allow the white blood cells to be mobilized. Okay, that's one effect. Another effect is that the antigen, the antigen can directly bind to the antibodies, and when this happens, further immunoresponses can actually be activated. So we earlier on talked about what we call memory. So when you get infected by an infection for the first time, of course your body will respond, and the B cells will produce antibodies associated with that antigen. Okay. Now, symptoms may appear. Okay? The next time you get an infection, this will mean that we will have what we call memory cells which are already created as a result of the first exposure. So when you get infected again, the immune response is going to be faster. Yes, because you were initially exposed and you had the memory B cells being made in your first exposure. So the second exposure becomes it results into a faster response by the immune system. So this is what we call primary response and secondary response. Basically, what this means is that when you first get exposed to an exposure, or when you first get exposed to a pathogen or an antigen, your body will react or will respond by producing the needed antibodies. And at the same time, you'll have what you call memory B cells being produced. Such that the next time you get the same exposure or the same attack, then the immune system will be able to respond faster and more strongly because of the memory B cells that were made. So we have what we call acquired immunity, and we have 4 types of acquired immunity. So I'll go through them. The first one being the active natural immunity. Okay, this one is the one where if you get exposed to a pathogen, your body responds because you already have antibodies. Okay, that's natural acquired immunity. Okay, so that means exposure to the first pathogen will result into symptoms, and when it is actually arrested, then you develop immunity after recovering from an infection. And then we have what we call active artificial immunity. Okay, this is when you get immunity not by getting an infection in a natural way, but as a result of being immunized. Okay, when you are immunized, you're basically exposed to antigens, and these antigens result or trigger the immune system to produce the needed antibodies, and therefore you become immune. Okay, by vaccination. So vaccination is basically active artificial immunity. And then we move to passive natural immunity. Okay, so this happens, for example, when the mother's antibodies actually cross the placenta to protect the baby against infection, or the milk, the breast milk that the mother has, contains immunoglobulins, and these will protect the baby against infections. Okay, and then we move to what we call the passive artificial immunity. Okay, this is temporary immunity acquired through injection of preformed, already made antibodies. The impact is fast, but it is short-lived because you will not have immune memory that we talked about earlier on. So that marks the end of this presentation. If you have any